And I want to thank our sponsors, which is American Photography, Photo Shelter, Archive, Epson, and Pro Photo Daily. I ask everyone to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Jay will put the link in the chat room. Also want to thank everyone. These past couple of months, we've had some really great weeks with focusing on the Ukraine issue and gun control. We're going to be doing one on mental health. So if you know photographers in that space, please, send them a note that I want to do that, and they can contact me. And that's something that, like those other issues are important. We'll do a whole week on them. So I think people, really like, those shows. So tonight we have three New York City-based photographers, and I appreciate everyone coming in, on a nice muggy night in the middle of the summer to be with us. So again, I really appreciate that. And we have Robert Rips, we have William Douglas King, and we have Nancy Scherl, who is going to kick us off and start the night. And she will be speaking about her new book that will be available for anyone to purchase. So Nancy, you can take over and share your screen, and off we go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'll share the screen first. Okay, so now I can thank everyone. I first want to thank Frank for inviting me to participate in this evening's projections among Robert Rips and William King. I also want to thank Jay for the tech support, and of course, everyone for attending. I recognize many of you, though not all of you, but it's great to be here. So I'm going to just give you a little background information about myself before really scrolling through some of the slides. I'm a fine art portrait photographer, and ever since college, which was a few decades ago, I really was trying to find the happy medium between documentary and pictorialism genres in my portrait work. And as a young child, I was very lucky that I was exposed to my dad's. He was an enthusiast, but he loved the lens-based media. And I got a Brownie camera at a very early age. And I, of course, would watch him have a lot of fun with our family portraits. So I tried to emulate what he did with my stuffed animals. And though I didn't realize it at the time, because I didn't even know what pictorialism was, I think this really sort of was the beginning of my interest in staging and what is now what could be known as pictorialism. And in addition to that, I was very lucky that I had parents who subscribed to Look magazine, Life magazine, and of course, National Geographic. And I just loved flipping the pages through these magazines. And again, I didn't realize at that early age that was really what whet my interest in documentary work. So when I went to college, I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I really drew from the journalism department and the art departments, trying to find my middle spot between the documentary and the staged. So let's see. So tonight, I'm going to share with you my work from the Dining Alone in the Company of Solitude series and newly released book by Daylight Books. And I guess I just want to start by saying that in the 1980s, I started this work. I was living in the West Village alone, and I was pursuing my photography dream, sort of trying to make the income and also do the fine art portrait work. And though I had a big family and many friends, many of them had gone off to graduate school or to get married and even have babies. And here I was in the big city, trying to make a living, but also very interested in pursuing my fine artwork. So I have to admit, I was inspired by my mother, who lost her husband, my father, when I was in high school. And she inspired me, and it really sort of got me interested in this whole notion of solitude and in all of its complexities. And it's really through my mother that I learned that life carries on, and that despite our challenges, actually there can be a lot of self-growth during the alone times. So here I was in the West Village, surrounded by some of the most wonderful cafes and coffee shops and restaurants. I loved people watching. I loved people watching. I was a photographer, and I was lured by the subject of solitude, and so began this series. Basically, I would photograph it on and off through the years, but I was I had a pretty clear focus on the vision of this project, in that I knew I wanted to use peopled restaurant interiors, focusing on lone diners as a metaphor for what it visually looks like to be alone in public. Let's see. So really, each image in this work invites the viewer to explore and interpret as they see fit, and to draw on the inspiration of what their dining experience is, because many of us project as observers what we see. In the foreword of the book, Laura Presley, who's the executive director of the center, wrote that these images unfold in a cinema verite style, so the camera is used to unveil truths in a documentary approach. I thank Laura Presley. I don't know that she's here tonight, but I really thank her because she wrote a beautiful foreword. And I think that this really articulates far better than I ever could about how my work sort of came together. In short, what I would do is I would use my lights, my strobe lights mostly, sometimes strobe and tungsten, and I would light an interior and have something all set up. And I would have already made arrangements with subjects to come and join me in the restaurant, and then they would act out how they felt when they were dining alone in this public space of a restaurant. And a lot of the subjects that I photographed, some of them I knew, and many of them were total strangers. I would just approach them, explain to them what my project was about, and ask them if they were interested. To my amazement, most of them were. Very few said no. And then we would make plans from there. I would tell them that they can wear whatever they want and act as ever they want. And one of the things that I emphasized was to please try to ignore my lights and ignore my camera and me, and just really get into their own mindset of what their surroundings were. So the sky was the limit. It could be a crowded restaurant. It could be an empty restaurant. They could be people watching, looking at their iPhone. In a certain year, I won't say when, they could be smoking a cigarette. And I guess this is the perfect time as ever to sort of just give a thank you to Daylight Books, because Michael Itkoff really recognized the timeliness of this project and the relevancy of it. And so here it is. Homer Restaurant was a few blocks away from where I lived for a couple of decades in the West Village. I used to frequent it. And Well, I guess it's important. I almost forgot to say this, that the subject, okay, moving up, right along here, Burger and Fries. This was at the Union Square Coffee Shop, which actually closed during the pandemic, just as an aside. This was at Cafe Borgia in the West Village, 1990. Again, it was a mixed bag. I knew some of these people and some of them were total strangers. I didn't know this guy. I didn't know the guy before. I just really went up to them and asked them if they'd like to participate. Coffee break at Isola's in Chicago, Illinois. And then we have a Rose and Wine, which is at a restaurant in the West Village, at Bodini's, which is now closed. And again, the restaurant would be formally lit, but the subjects would come and would be asked to just basically ignore the lighting and try to pretend that I was not there with my camera.
So Nancy,
Yeah.
what was the impetus for directing them to, I mean, because you're directing them, right? And what did you bring to that direction, to that, their instructions?
Well, actually, there was a very, very fine balance of where I would direct, but I really wouldn't direct. I would say the larger part of me was not orchestrating in any way. If they were stuck or they were a little nervous and getting used to this, I would sort of just paint a scene and say, I'm not here. My frame is on you, but you can pretend that the restaurant is crowded, or you can pretend that there's a couple over there, out of the frame that's amusing you, whatever it is. And that really relaxed them because they got into their own imagination and sort of took it away. So my direction for them was very minimal.
And was that something new for you?
To not direct them a lot?
Yeah, like to just give them a piece and then let them go on their own.
No, I don't think it was new for me. I think it was, it was not a commercial job. It didn't need a lot of direction. And I think that, part of my interest in this project was to get ordinary people, not actors and actresses, and to just really have them be themselves in this environment. Most of them did fine. Most of them really did fine with it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the only part that I orchestrated was that I wanted to do, for example, this particular restaurant, and I wanted it to be a white table restaurant with a single woman contrasted by a couple. And that was really it. That was the extent of what I set up. But a lot of these images raise questions. I think that this one might raise questions such as, is there a stigma for dining alone? Does it take courage to dine alone? Does dining alone and its stigma, or what the stigma once was, affect the diner?
Right.
And is there still a stigma, and is it different for men versus women? These are questions that actually are not a focal point of my essays, but Laura Presley raised them in her foreword, and I do think it's very interesting. And there are no answers. The audience can answer them. This is Distracted at Ginza Simone in Tokyo, Japan. I just love the vermilion lacquered counter. This is a double diner doubles at the Market Diner. And the Market Diner is still in existence to my knowledge. I used to work in one of the big design houses somewhere in that area. It was all the way over between 11th and 12th. and I would walk over here for lunch. I got to know some of the staff. And one day I asked these guys who worked there if they'd be willing to pose for me. Of course, they were thrilled. During the days of Polaroid, I would give them a Polaroid followed by a print. And once Polaroids became harder to get, it was really just a print. This is Double Trouble.
That's great.
In New York. This restaurant actually didn't close, but it relocated a few blocks up Upper East Side. And I guess the only thing I would say about this image is that in the beginning of the project, I was really trying to focus on one or two people in the frame. And I really wanted to leave it for interpretation, who they might be looking at outside of the frame. So there was always an interaction, but what was not seen outside of the frame was just as important to me as what was seen in the frame. And then somewhere along the line, I just decided to make the dynamic, the tension of a dynamic actually within the frame. So I thought it was more interesting. This is Graveyard Shift, and it's actually at Waverly Diner, which still exists on Waverly Place, right on the corner of 6th Avenue in Waverly. My apartment was for many years on the corner, well, it was on Waverly Place, catty corner to this. So I would often come here. It was like a home away from home when I didn't feel like dealing with cooking or anything. And these guys, I knew them all by name. I mean, I saw them all the time. And I guess one day I just approached them and asked them if they'd like to pose for me. They looked at me like, if you want to go through the effort, sure. But I thought what was interesting would be to photograph a scene of workers who would be what's called the graveyard shift, because in a sense, we don't know exactly what they're experiencing, but they are, they're separated and apart from those people that work a 9-to-5 job. But again, the work invites viewers to indulge in their own points of view and interpretations. This is my dear mother, Lila Scherl, who passed away last July.
Oh.
I know Frank got to meet her a couple of times at some of the galleries. And she really inspired me in many ways, but she inspired me to be fearless in embracing my alone times. And my dad had passed away when I was a senior in high school. He was way too young, but I witnessed her courageousness and her courageous outlook at large. And I just really admired that she was comfortable in her own skin. She happened to, enjoy my work, but then all mothers do, right? But I'm so grateful that she agreed to get up early to pose for me in 2018. It was right before the pandemic. And it was very early because I would usually ask the restaurant owners if I could get in there early or between lunch or dinners so that I had the space to myself. So
Nancy,
yeah.
A question from Susan Maytel. Did you ever think of doing these shots totally spontaneously, without lights, without directing?
Well,
Great question.
the answer is, yep, I love the question. And the answer is, it's another style. And I have done some work in that vein, but this particular body of work, it was more formal. It was really that I wanted the cinematic lighting and I wanted the nostalgic quality. And then, where I pulled it back a bit was that I really sort of, once it was staged in that regard, I hoped that the subjects would just relax and die and do what they would do.
Mm. Amy put in this comment. I love this work. The book is gorgeous. It begs the question of what it means to be alone versus to be lonely.
Yes.
To live in comfort versus solitude versus to experience feelings of otherness. A host of questions arise. I would love to know how much has changed after 2.5 years of universal solitude. Are we more comfortable or less comfortable, I guess, to be alone?
Amy, that's a great question. Thank you.
Wow.
I can ad lib this one because I feel like I live and breathe the answers to these things. Not that I'm the guru, but I have really given them thought. So when I first started this book, this project, I had to be honest with you, obviously I knew nothing about the pandemic, nor did I have any intention of making a part 2. I felt that, the subject itself is universal and timeless. And that's where I wanted it to be. And I actually had the book edited because I had so many pictures initially by Elizabeth Avedon, and then later hired Bonnie Bryant, who was an excellent designer, and who really paired things together for me. It was beautiful. And the long and the short of it is I had not had a publisher, nor did I know whether I was going to publish or self-publish at that time. I just really wanted to envision what it looked like. So Bonnie put together a beautiful book, and it was really part 1, except without the title, because the title was Dining Alone in the Company of Solitude. And once the pandemic started, I sat in one of those outdoor dining places, and I really started thinking, my book isn't done. As much as I don't want to do this, I think I have to expand the scope of the book, because to Amy's point, the pandemic really took the whole concept of solitude into a very sharp focus. And in my opinion, solitude can be solace and joy, but it can also swing into loneliness and alienation. And I feel that during the pandemic, many of us were very isolated and very, very lonely and separated and just very disjointed from one another. But at the same time, I felt that paradoxically, the pandemic, the fact that we were all connected in a certain sense by the fact that we were all vulnerable and susceptible to this contagious and lethal virus, the fact that we were all dealing with some very heavy stuff, the fact that we were all isolated, I think it brought us together because it cut through a lot of the fact, just a lot of things that we otherwise wouldn't have had to address. And one of the things that it did was it really forced us to understand that this contagious virus does not discriminate. So I think, does that answer your question, Amy? I'll move on to the next thing.
Yes, it does.
And we can pick it up later. So this is Traveling Alone, Dining Alone, 2014. The Extrovert, unknown restaurant, coffee shop, about 1998. And so now I told you my story about how I was, it's a self-portrait, dining alone one day in one of these outdoor restaurants, feeling so good that I had this book designed and I was happy with it. And all I had to do was figure out whether I was going to self-publish or publish. And I thought, no, the book's not done because I've got to take some of these pandemic pictures. So started part 2, going back to the beginning of part 2, which is called Universal and Timely instead of Timeless. And what I did was I used to make a lot of Polaroid transfers in the 1980s and 90s. And I just love the quality of them when you transfer the emulsion to, a watercolor paper. The imagery is just really very non-distinct and sort of faded. It looked like a very fresco-like. So I started the book with this, and the concept was that all of the imagery in part one, which these are from, had become faded memories. And then I enter part two, which was our reality. It felt very surreal. I think it was very strange to have these. I went around the whole city and even into Queens and Brooklyn, and I saw a lot of shack-like spaces that were set up and some more elegant places that were set up, but it all felt that it affected our cityscape in a very strange way. And this is Baby Brasa in the West Village. I saw a lot of plastic, whether it was plastic curtains to be doors to keep the warmth inside, or used as partitions, or at Julius's, which was again a few blocks away from Waveland, where I used to
It's
live.
really funky.
Private tent. Yeah, I think that the restaurant owners and managers became very, very creative. So, and then of course, you know, I loved seeing people, what they were doing when they were dining alone. And I think people were just so eager and wanting to connect in any way that they could, that you'd see them with dogs and iPhones and anything, but they were outside in these outdoor dining spaces. Stars, Stripes, and Checks at Paul's the Burger Joint, East Village.
Cool.
Dining in a
Oh,
Bubble
wow.
at Ula's. And then another self-portrait. I like this. It's for Charles Prime Rib on Charles Street in the West Village. And I just really liked it because I felt like the red curtains is something that I would have done in my own place. So it felt very warm and cozy. That's my dad's twin lens Rolleiflex on the table there. And no, I have never photographed with high heels. So this is the last slide. I just am really honoring my mom, whose birthday was July 6th. I just want to thank her, and I really hope that though these images are meant to be interpreted as the viewer sees fit, I just want to say that I really hope that though it's my point of view, I hope that some people will be inspired to embrace solitude, and that they will see the strength and independence that my mother so fiercely seemed to embrace.
That's very, very nice. Make sure, Nance, you put
Yes.
in the chat room all your links for the book and your website, and any way that people can contact you, so everyone has that.
I will do that. No, I
So-
will definitely do that. Any
so-
questions, or did you want to take questions later, Frank?
No, I had a question for you. Did Edward Hopper play any role in this in your
Yes.
mind?
Definitely, definitely. I loved Hopper ever since I was young.
Yeah.
It's one of my influences. Absolutely love his work. I was very influenced by Hopper. I was very influenced by Cartier-Bresson, and then some of the more contemporary photographers of the times, which were really more like the early 80s, that influenced me, like maybe Cindy Sherman, to a larger extent, Sandy Skoglund. I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with her, but she did this wonderful installation work that was often surreal. She'd make sculptures, and one of her images is radioactive cats. I'll put her information in the chat as well. But yeah, Hopper is one of my favorites.
Yeah, and so your collaboration with the writer,
I'm sorry?
your collaboration with your writer, how involved was she during the project? While you were shooting, was it daily? Was it monthly? How did you guys work?
No, I didn't work with her that way. I had actually written a lot during this project, particularly during the pandemic. And I just would write and get my thoughts together. And so I had written a couple of essays And then somewhere prior to the pandemic, I reached out to Laura Presley because she actually was a portfolio reviewer of my work, and she responded very favorably to it because it was this work. And I asked her if she'd like to write the foreword for me, and she said she'd be delighted, and she just took it away. But I gave her my essays, I gave her the pictures so that she could really see the context. And
Right.
she did her own research, and really extensive research.
Well, that's good. You when you have a minute now, Nance, you should read the chat room. I mean, everyone is just loving it, really, really loving it. So yeah. So make sure you put your links in there. Thank you, and thank you very much for sharing that with us. But what we'll do is we'll let William come, and later on we'll open it up and we'll have all kinds of questions for everyone.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Yep. So William, we'll let you jump right in. Right, you could share the screen, Jay will set you up. But great work, Nancy. Everyone really loves that. That's really
Thank
great.
you.
It's great to see Catherine Gibbons here tonight, too. Haven't seen her in a long time.
Well,
She's
Catherine,
a good friend.
hello, Catherine.
William, you should be good to go.
Can you see it?
Nothing yet.
Not yet. Just hit the share screen button.
Oh, I did already. Oh, nuts. Where'd it go? Share screen. I thought I hit that already. Oh, share.
There we go.
There we go.
Now I got to go up here and go to open this up again. Okay. Then go to view your full screen.
Yep.
Perfect.
Perfect, William. It's all yours, buddy.
Now,
Yeah.
hi, good afternoon. My name is William King. And I have my email down there at the bottom. I want to thank you, Frank, for inviting me to talk tonight. I've only been given a chance to present this work once before, and it's such a large body of work. We're just going to see a glimpse of it tonight. I'm going to read this to you because then I have no other text. The Salt Marsh Nature Center is an ecological restoration project that has reclaimed nature's ecosystem. The tidal marsh is a time capsule of American history, incorporating political transitions and their effect upon its ecosystem. In 1665, the marsh depicted wide tracts of green, grassy, fertile salt marsh meadows filled with wildflowers, thickets of shrubs, and vines that dominated the landscapes. Myrtile warblers, grasshopper sparrows, cottontail rabbits, ringneck pheasants, horseshoe and fiddler crabs were but a small sampling of the plant and wildlife that inhabited the marsh. By 1935, the marsh had become a dump. A major landfilling from 1945 to 1962 buried the marsh around Garrettson Creek under 8 feet of garbage and construction debris, unlawful dumping of chemicals, cars, refrigerators, stoves, tires, pollutants from leaky septic tanks, and runoffs from oil-stained roadways contributed to the environmental degradation and water pollution of the living marsh. The Salt Marsh Nature Center has reclaimed nature's ecosystem through the ecological restoration of the salt marsh by the City of New York Parks and Recreation, New York Department of Environmental Conservation, and the U.S. Corps of Army Engineers. The restoration process is a long-term project currently in progress today. And those are, I listed some of my links.
So Garrison Creek is in Brooklyn?
Absolutely, it's in Marine Park,
Right, okay. I just
right
wanted-
on Avenue U.
I want everyone to know where it is. Okay.
All right. This particular image was not, today I photograph only with a Sony RX10 Mark IV. I started the project with a Sony RX10 Mark III, but this is one of two images that I'm showing you tonight that was actually shot with a Nikon. And it was part of an assignment I was doing for a midterm for Katrine Eisman's Photoshop class for my master's program, in which I was photographing a series of landscapes that were panoramics. So in this particular scene, you're looking at 4 vertical frames that are stitched together. And it was photographed at sunrise. And it was photographed in October, in the fall of the year. I asked the Rangers a couple of years ago if I could photograph. I wanted to photograph the portraits of the Rangers, but they said I could only photograph the backs of their heads. So I got permission to photograph them at sunrise when they had campouts behind the nature center. And only 2 of the dates worked out where it wasn't raining. This was one of the dates, but the sunrise was really cloudy. The color wasn't there. And, you know, it's just one of those days where it didn't work, but I got to photograph the Rangers. So I made a mask. I masked the Rangers out. I took another sunrise image that I had made. Plus I added the phragmites that are on the backs. These are phragmites. I don't know if you can see my mouse. They're on the backs of the Rangers to help give it depth. Phragmites is an invasive species that these guys are always fighting in the park. And I ended up making a black and white image out of it, which I really like it. One of the other invasive species of the park, it's not this beautiful bird, but it's the plants behind the bird. They're mugworts, and they're not out of Harry Potter. They're these plants that they grow so tall that they'll grow up to 6 feet, maybe higher, and they're really thick, and it just takes over the meadow. And the meadow's a very large acreage. So last fall, the Parks Department cut down half of the meadow. The other half of the meadow, they let grow. The mugworts today, in the area where they didn't cut it down, it's close to 7 feet tall. The mugworts, this was in the part of the meadow that they had cut down. I photographed it from the trail because I don't walk into the meadow because migratory birds live there, as well as the pheasants and all the rabbits. And it's an environment for the animals, not for people to run around and play in. You know what I mean? But this is one of the beautiful birds that they have there. It's a ringneck pheasant. I was so thrilled when I got to view this. I was standing on the bridge one afternoon. It was in the summertime, probably 2 years ago, and I just peered down into the water. I heard this bubble, this wake at the top. You see it on the upper left, and it was a horseshoe crab. There was a pair of horseshoe crabs just under the surface, and I was able to grab a couple of frames. And I love the prehistoric quality of this, and just the nature, the fact that it's there. The salt marsh is a brackish tidal inlet. So it's a combination of a little bit of fresh water, but it's mostly salt. But it's a combination because it's brackish. So this is, whoop, went too far. This is the fiddler crab that lives in the lower marsh. They live underground. They come up in the late spring. And I love the shell. If you look at his shell, it looks like the Tasmanian devil to me. I don't know what it looks like to you, but I just love the design on the top of the shell. This guy's only got one eye. You notice that he's got two claws. The right claw is the large claw that he uses for defense. And now this character is only about 2 inches long. So I'm standing on a bridge looking down, I'm photographing him with a RX-10 Mark IV, but I'm zoomed out to 500 millimeters to make him in my face because I want to see him eating. He feeds himself with the little tiny claw. It just fits perfectly in his mouth. Whenever you see these guys, they're usually running around with that big claw up in the air and they're ready to attack you. They're a lot of fun to watch, but they usually don't last long because they're one of the favorite appetizers for the birds. It's too bad.
Survival of the fittest, right, William?
Yeah, and how fast you can get down into your home.
There you go.
Now, one day I went there in the spring, a couple of years ago, and the water looked like it was boiling. I couldn't tell what was going on. I was standing behind the nature center on the patio, looking down into the water. So I zoomed out to my lens on the RX-10. This was on the RX-10 Mark III. It's a 24 to 600 millimeter in RAW. I zoomed out to 600 millimeter, and what we had was a giant school of bunker going to town in the inlet. They were just all over the place. I couldn't even begin to tell you how many fish there were. This was one of many photographs I had taken that afternoon. It was just so much fun to watch. And this great blue herring certainly thought it was a lot of fun. This is actually later in the summer and early fall during sunset. The light was streaming across the surface of the water, and he had speared this bunker in the water, and I have a sequence of images of him flying up out of the water onto the rocks here. And I sat there and I just watched him figure out how to get this thing down his throat because it was a big fish. The thing that surprised me most was a few weeks ago, I'm standing on the bridge. The water was at lower tide. You see mussels in the foreground, these little black shapes, they're mussels. And the salt marsh grass is growing up between them, and I heard this splashing. I was focusing on a waterfowl that was across the inlet. And I kept hearing the splashing, and I thought it was a rail, but it wasn't. It was a shark. And I had never seen a shark at the nature center. In fact, I was a little surprised. There was a gentleman walking across the bridge, and I asked him, "Tell me what you see, please." And he said, "It's a shark. It's a dog shark. And they do live in the waters in Garrison Creek because of the brackish consistency of the water." But no, I don't think anyone's ever gotten a photograph of one before, but I was thrilled. This was photographed with the RX-10 Mark IV, but instead of shooting it in RAW, I photographed it in high resolution JPEG, which doubled the focal length from 6 to 12. So it's essentially a 1200 millimeter.
Question, William. Somebody's
Yeah.
asking, do you use a polarizing filter?
No, good question. I started trying to use a polarizing filter, but I have a tendency to do a lot of panoramic photography where I'm stitching frames together. And I found that it was totally the wrong filter to ever consider because it would you can't stitch images, multiple images together shooting with a polarizer. And I found that using the software that I use, I process with Lightroom, of course, and a new Lightroom software with the masking system that it has is just phenomenal. I mean, it is ridiculous how much control you have over reorchestrating the light in an image and tonality and color. I use Photoshop. I also use Luminar 4 sometimes, not all the time. But I have a polarizer, but I haven't used it. If I go to Tucson, Arizona, I'll probably use it. This is a Phragmite sunrise. This is down at the edge of the meadow. I'm on the trail. It's shot with at a focal length of 300 millimeters. It's the sunrise coming up behind a row of Phragmites, and the Phragmites are probably 8 feet tall. And the wind's blowing, and I wanted to get that. I didn't want the blur, but I wanted the variation of movement that was being provided by the wind. And I'm just really happy that I was able to maintain the shadow detail and yet get the dramatics of the image. And again, it's like, it's in the processing. It's like when I was younger, I studied photography at Art Center College of Design. We studied processing black and white and color, where we used developers that were made by Kodak and Agfa, or we made our own chemicals. And we would overexpose, underdevelop, and use color gels in order to control the tonality within a scene. So what your eye was seeing isn't what we were getting on film. But you do the same thing today. If you have a substantial background in fundamental photography, it translates into digital, but you have to have it in order to make those kind of adjustments.
And we should say, this place is a half hour from the city, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. This is 2 frames. This was also shot with the Nikon. This is 2 frames stitched together. And I just love it. I mean, I haven't seen another scene like that. This was shot in 2014. And I haven't seen another sunrise that equaled its magnificence. It's just gorgeous there. It's like a paradise in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
This was shot in December during the winter months. I love shooting in the winter. It's very cold, but the light is incredible. This is like at 8 o'clock-ish in the morning. It's a little bit low tide because you can see the mussels in the background inside the salt marsh grass. And this is a pair of mallards waiting for, I guess, to wake up, because I'm there since I arrive at dawn or slightly before dawn, and I shoot through maybe 45 minutes after sunrise, and then I'm done. But the thing I like about this picture, outside of the mallards and the lovely light that's on the mallards, is what's in the background. Because this is a tidal marsh, the tide rises and falls. And this place, knowing that this place was totally destroyed by the state of New York and then repaired, the mussels, every time the tide comes in, the water raises, covers the mussels. The mussels go to work and do their job. They start cleaning the water. And when the tide goes out, the salt marsh grass actually helps drain pollutants or litter, like beer cans and paper. I have a whole section of photographs that just deal with litter. They're like still lifes, so you might see in a shot in the studio, but they're not shot in the studio. They're actually there with natural light. This is again one of my favorite times to shoot. It's after sunrise. It's about the sun is just high enough. It's just above the tree line at the Marine Park golf course. So it's on a low angle, but it's not really high in the sky, and it still has the rich, warm color of the sunrise, and it's reflecting just the entire surface of the water turns that color, and it was just it was like magic. So every day during the pandemic, this is what I would do. I would go out every time I got upset over what was on the news or the fact of the pandemic. I would go to start working on my project, and I would run into something like this: a snowy egret looking for food under a Homer Simpson sky that's reflected in the water.
And Sandy has a question. Do you use a 600 millimeter lens for these shots?
The
Okay.
camera I use has one lens on it. Okay, it's a Sony RX10 Mark IV, and the lens is a 24 millimeter focal length to 600 millimeter. In other words, you've got that entire length of focal length in one lens in RAW. So this particular image, I had to shoot through bushes and stuff because there's a fence and I can't go. I don't trespass onto the animal's environment. I don't have that lack of sensibility. So I photographed this in high resolution JPEG. With that camera, if you set it in high resolution JPEG, it doubles the focal length in camera. So you're viewing it through a 1200 millimeter at 600, not 600. And I like cropping in camera. I mean, that's the way I've done that my entire life, cropped in camera. And the quality's there because it's a Zeiss lens. It's an excellent camera. This was not long ago, a couple months ago. I had some bad news about my identical twin and I was like bummed out. So I went over early in the morning and I found this mute swan sleeping, floating in the water. The sun came up, but it was like a light cloud. It was like you were under a milk glass tent. It was just nuts. So I did a series of images of this mute swan just drift, slowly drifting. The water was like glass, and all of a sudden this white egret comes walking behind the swan, foraging for fish. So I was able to grab this.
So this space, you go there for solitude as well.
Absolutely. It refocuses me totally. But then I got to come back and process all these images, and that helps too.
Beautiful.
This wasn't very long ago either. Same type of lighting situation. It wasn't a clear sky, and the sun was behind a thin layer of clouds. And there were these two mallards. The tide was up, and there was this little surface of a rock. I mean, it must have been like 8 inches in diameter, across, and they're both standing on this little rock. And there's nothing else there.
Yeah.
It was just really beautiful. The Parks Department tries to put in lots of different types of flowers that were originally in the park in the 1600s, but they also planted these are datura plants, and they're basically poisonous. They're highly poisonous nightshades, commonly known as the thorn apples or Jansen weeds. They're also known as the devil's trumpet. But they're really beautiful and they only bloom at night. So if there's a full moon and during, I get there at dawn, I have to wait for the light to get just high enough where I've got a little bit of influence from the sun coming across it, and they hadn't started to close yet. I was testing a piece of equipment for this company called, what's it called? It's called Tech Power, and it's a, I don't know if you can see it. Where's the camera?
There
It
you go.
attaches to the top of your, where your flash attaches, and it's actually a laser. It throws out a green laser beam, and I put it on the center of the flower, and I shot, and then I would shoot it, and it came out perfectly, just perfectly sharp on that spot. It was just incredible how it works. But the company asked me if I would photograph birds with it, and I declined to do so because it's a laser beam. Give me a break. I don't want to point that in an animal's eye by mistake. So I used it for the flowers, and I found it really useful because anything for still lifes too would be really great.
William, do you do any masking for the images with the swans and the ducks?
No,
No, so it's all in camera.
no, well, look, I'm old school, and I used to love Ansel Adams and Minor White, and so, nothing's straight out of camera as far as I'm concerned. I use Lightroom to make, you might call it global adjustments. I call it fine tuning the light within an image to reorchestrate it as to the way I see it, I perceive it, because I'm the photographer. I'm taking the pictures through my eyes, and it has to meet with my approval. It would look different if somebody else did it, if somebody else were to edit it. But I hardly ever have shot a straight shot and had it reproduced straight, no matter what it was, even if it was for a still life catalog, like for Concord watches, it would have to be, somehow it would be retouched.
Right.
But the flower pictures, there's no filter. It's just it's a straight shot, and these are actually hardly anything was done to these because of the quality of light that was there. And I basically wait for the light. I've learned over time that you have to put the time in, be there, and put the time in and be ready to capture the light when it happens, because it's so fleeting. Just like these birds, they're so fleeting. They're too fast for me to shoot with this camera, because the camera is not like an RX10 Mark IV where that's really fast. It's slower. So I have to figure out how am I going to capture this yellow throat. That's what it's called. It was in the meadow on a foggy day, on a foggy morning in the fog, and it's shot with like a 300 or 400 millimeter focal length through dried grass, because you see the new grasses are just growing in the background. They hadn't really taken off. I was able to capture a few frames where the bird's head was at different angles, and then it just was like gone like a bullet. They're so fast. Some of the newer Sonys have the ability to track really fast. This camera does not have that. It's primarily, if I had to go on a trip and I was only allowed to take one camera, I would take this camera. I mean, I own 4 different Sony cameras, but I would take this camera because of what's in it, and I know how to use it really well. This is one of the most important pictures I chose to pick because I only was allotted 20. This is called Angel Wing. And unfortunately, this is a mute swan. Angel wing is caused by a nutritional deficiency in vitamins and minerals combined with a high level of carbohydrates and sugars. Basically, it's caused by feeding waterfowl bread, whether it's mallard ducks or any variety of waterfowl. You feed them bread, like people go and stand on the bridge and this was late in the afternoon. This poor swan swam up to me from like 100 yards away, like a bullet, straight line. And I freaked out when I got close because I was devastated by what I was looking at. As he turned to swim away, because I wasn't going to feed him, I made the photograph. Angel wing can be repaired, but it takes a long time. The diets have to be adjusted for the birds. This poor bird won't be able to mate. He's defenseless. And all it takes is for people to understand, don't feed the birds bread, because it'll basically end up ruining their lives. This was in the meadow in March, I believe. I thought it was the winter. I love shooting in the winter, except it's so darn cold out. One day the camera stopped working. My fingers kept working if the camera didn't. But this is a panoramic, and I usually shoot two different types of panoramic. This is 8 vertical frames stitched together to make up that width of the pano. So I've made an 18 by 22 inch print of this, and it's like super sharp, and the color is just really beautiful. My reason I shoot panoramics is because I can make larger prints and they really hold up. In a panoramic, you're using the same exposure on each segment of that image, where you have that's divided up into 8 shots. You could shoot this with a wider lens at a wider focal length. And to do that, I wouldn't do just a straight shot. I would do a bracket of maybe 5 stops, same one f-stop, let's say f11, and then bracketing the f-stops from light. So I would pick up the shadow detail, and I would expose for the highlight detail, and then I make an HDR panoramic out of it. And I end up with an image that has all the right information in it, so I could maintain that detail. But you'll get, for larger prints, you'll get more detail out of doing a panoramic that's made up of a series of shots.
And William, how long do you set up for a shot like this, with your tripod? And
A few minutes. Because time's of the essence. Light doesn't wait for you. It's constantly moving and changing, and the color values are changing, the intensity, the reflective values. It's constantly changing. So I would do maybe 2 or 3 takes on a panoramic. Then I'll go to a vertical setup and maybe shoot a different type of panoramic, or change the scene. I keep moving because the light's constantly changing. I learned that over time. It's not something I just popped into my head one day. It's from revisiting one location, the same location, day after day, year after year, season after season. I end up photographing the transition of the seasons within the meadow. So I'm photographing the plants, the transition of the plants from autumn to the fall, to the winter, and back into the spring. And it changes.
And you're taking notes. You take notes, and you go back to your notes.
my notes consist of exposure notes. I must have 4 or 5 notebooks.
Yeah.
And I keep them also relating to printing. I have notebook printing. So it's getting to be too much. That's why would like to get to a book pretty soon. But I can't stop doing this. I'm like in love with this.
As it should be.
This is my last image. And whenever there's a super moon, I head to the park. I mean, I try to get a decent shot, and it's not easy. A year ago, there was this is the strawberry moon. This was recent, but a year ago, the strawberry moon, it came up further east and far enough that the water level's extremely high tide. I was able to get the moon reflecting into a pool of water by the Osprey stand, but the graphics of the landscape, it didn't do it. I mean, it was there, but it was okay, but it just didn't do it for me graphically. So the beginning of the moon rising, it's veiled because behind this bridge, you have Breezy Point and you have the ocean. Well, there was a veil of clouds in the ocean both last year and this year. So when it first comes up, you can't see the moon. And you're going, where is it? It's supposed to be up. You have to look really hard, and all of a sudden you see a warm glow in the sky, a faint glow, and then it starts to build. And when I saw the glow, I started running. I was like 100 yards, I don't know, maybe 70 yards off where I should have been. So I started running down to my west so I could get the shot. What I wanted was a landscape that would identify the landscape in the water. Again, there was no breeze. It was like glass. So I
What's
was
the name of this
looking.
bridge, Robert?
That's the Marine Parkway Bridge.
Marine Park. Yeah.
It's a really cool bridge to drive
It is.
over.
I remember going over there to Neponset. Beautiful.
So, and this is a straight shot. It's not a panoramic. I didn't do any bracketing. It's just boom. That's it.
Beautiful.
So that's my last photograph. If you have any questions.
Now, we'll get to Robert. Just one question. Can you speak quickly about the processing and the stitching of the panoramics?
Sure. Well, let's say the other day I went out and I photographed, on the 4th of July, I went out and I photographed the sunrise. I decided on one scene not to shoot a sequence of horizontals or verticals. I just wanted one scene cropped in camera. So let's say I shoot at ISO 1600 and I shoot at, I started around f8. And then I bracket the shutter speed. I try not to go below a 30th, even though it's on a tripod. And I bracket it 5, I think it's 5 stops. And then I take those 5 frames, I'm in Lightroom, and I export them to process them into an HDR. Because they're bracketed, you can process it as an HDR, and it combines all the digital information and the tonality and the contrast together. So what your eye sees and information that your eye doesn't see, you end up capturing when you combine all those together. And then I do some global adjustments in Lightroom using the masking tools for the sky, because it'll automatically pick out the sky, and it's really accurate. Or I can use the paintbrush tool to paint in the mask into an area. It's just amazing what you can do with that. Now the other type of panoramic I would shoot was, if the scenes, I want to capture the breadth of the inlet, where I have the nature center on one side and I have the Marine Park Bridge all the way over on the right side of the frame. I wouldn't shoot vertical frames. I'd probably shoot horizontal frames, and I'd probably do 5. Unless the sky was really dramatic and crazy, then I would shoot vertical frames, and I've done up to 15 images. No bracketing, same exposure, and in Lightroom, I process it as a
Okay.
panoramic.
Beautiful.
And then I do retouching on it.
Right. Okay. Well, you'll see in the chat room as well, William, everyone's loving these images, loving
Okay.
the process, loving the presentation, just from Jeff in particular. Just really, really wonderful. So we'll move over to Robert, and we'll have more questions for you later, I'm sure.
Okay,
So, Mr. Rips,
how do I get out of here?
you're in. Is Oliver still here?
I think he had to go to dinner,
Okay.
but he said it's being recorded. He promises he'll watch, so I'll give him a quiz afterwards, make sure he actually did watch.
Okay, fair enough. That's good. All right, Robert, it's all yours.
All right.
Thank you, William.
My pleasure.
Okay, we seeing the logo and the
Yes, we are.
Arma 5? Okay. Excellent. Thanks everyone for attending this evening. I know summer evenings are magic and special, so I appreciate you spending your time in front of a screen. Thank you to my fellow presenters, Nancy Scherl and Bill King, and a special thank you to Frank and Jay, as well as the sponsors and everyone that makes this event happen each month. I last showed images from the series over 3 years ago, so this time I decided to do a fair bit of talking while I show the images, but you can also feel free to turn off the sound and just let the images flow by if you desire. A little about my artistic practice. My work explores the interaction and intersection of nature and the man-made world, both visually as well as technically. How we influence the environment affects nature, and in turn, nature also affects our society.
Mhm.
Both can complement each other, better each other, but rarely do. The same can be said of technology versus society. Technology has enabled interconnectedness between most of the planet's inhabitants, but it has also led to many negative consequences, such as some disastrous effects of social media and the spread of misinformation. Technology can also be used negatively to distort or subvert reality through visual manipulation. To see how I got to this series, I need to go back a few years to my previous project, Urban Trees. I always did personal pictures, but Urban Trees was the first time I thought of them as an ongoing project, which made me think about shooting more images for it. Growing up, my mother was, and still is, a pretty serious botanist, so we always had tons of plants in the house. We also took summer camping trips and went hiking in the Adirondack Mountains, so nature has certainly been a big part of my life. Urban Trees was an attempt to answer the question, how do trees manage to survive and hopefully flourish in urban environments? And in turn, how do the trees themselves affect the environment? That project was really just for myself, although at some point I started putting some of them on my website. Eventually in 2014, my friend Jan Uretsky designed a book of the images, and I kept shooting images for the series for a couple of years. Then in 2015, I finally listened to all the people who told me I needed to get on this new thing called Instagram. Thanks, Maggie Soliday, for finally pushing me over the edge. And I finally started posting some of my Urban Trees images there. In early 2016, the death of my father, as well as Jan and another close friend my age, put me in a somewhat darker place with the work, both literally and figuratively. This led me to start going more abstract and focusing more on details, with less color, less concern with making scenic or pretty images. Then the election of 2016 and the subsequent change in direction and tone in our country deeply affected me. I felt I could no longer keep doing what I'd been doing, and my work needed to evolve, as well as provide an outlet not only for my emotions, but for what I was seeing, hearing, and experiencing daily in the media and around me. It became my way of channeling my sadness and frustration into my personal work. As I was working on a tree image, I accidentally inverted the colors and had a eureka moment. Something about the image felt right, more in tune with the way I was feeling. I came up with the word negativityness to describe what I was doing. I looked it up, and then I came up with my description for the project. Negativityness started as a response to the political climate in this country the past few years. Everything seemed to be about negativity, about division, about what is truth and what is inarguably false, yet touted as truth. How the surface of things can be 180 degrees opposite from what is underneath. It is about falsehoods and unseen influence. It is about discordance, about disorientation, about a world turned upside down and inside out. What was familiar and perhaps mundane has now taken on a sense of surrealism and unfamiliarity, which leaves us feeling unsure, confused, and helpless, powerless to get a handle on events affecting our daily lives. I started the series by going through some older images I had shot and seeing what happened when I simply inverted the colors. I got somewhat similar and predictable results. Green leaves went purple, bright blue skies went dark orange. Day became night. Sometimes I was surprised by what I got, and I ended up with something I was really happy with, or was able to go a little further with an image. But what I was getting was basically just the opposite of what I had already captured. I then tried to subvert the images a bit, such as messing with the colors in the raw adjustment window before I inverted the images. This gave me more options and the ability to do more variations from a single image. Sometimes I combined manipulated and non-manipulated elements in the same image, but they often felt a bit gimmicky to me. As I went on, I felt a closer connection to the more abstract, organic, nature-based imagery. I started to combine images in layers, use filters, work with color adjustment layers and other techniques in Photoshop that I had rarely used or didn't even know how to properly use. Basically, I played with the tools that were there until the images began to feel right, to convey some of the confusion and strangeness I was feeling. But also, I was trying to be upbeat, giving myself reasons to be inspired and even a bit hopeful that positive things can be created out of bad times and situations. Sometimes I think perhaps I go too far, make the colors too bright or the images too dark. Sometimes I throw in a portrait to see what happens. Sometimes I think I can get too abstract or even too literal, but overall I was very happy with the work I was doing. I also felt that with the direction the series was going, perhaps I was getting away from my original concept and definition of the project, but I kept the name.
So Robert, this metamorphosis that you've gone through, you can say it directly comes from the circumstances that we're all living through and how that
Right.
affected you. And
Right.
did you realize that as you were going through this?
Yeah, I think I did. I mean, certainly in 2016, when a lot of, I don't want to say bad things happened to me, but bad things happened around me, it definitely put me in a certain dark kind of a mood. And I just didn't feel right to be making these kind of pretty, tree, sunlight, flower kind of pictures. And I felt like I just was getting kind of more interested in the darker, sort of more abstract ones. And then I kind of, discovered this kind of way of working and kind of was going along with this stuff for a while. But definitely in the beginning, yeah. I mean, that's why I called it negativityness,
Right.
pretty early on, I guess.
And can you see the end yet, Robert? or you're still experiencing the moment?
You mean as
And-
far as the project?
Yeah, as far as the project, but how you're feeling externally with the world around you.
Maybe I'll answer that as I kind of work through this, and we'll see what
Okay.
see what happens. It's hard to know. It really is.
So, but this certainly is what your pulse is feeling, this work.
Yeah, it's kind of me trying to take these negative feelings and make something positive and upbeat, but also very surreal and very topsy-turvy out of what I'm seeing, and it just kind of a combination of those two things together.
Here's a great comment from Juliet Wolf Robin. Typical great question. You ever think of setting that to music?
Sure, I'll take suggestions later. I'll check the chat box.
No, that's a great idea.
People ask me if I listen to psychedelic music when I create these, and I do sometimes. No drugs, but the music is there. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Then COVID hit. Again, my world, our world, turned upside down and inside out. Overnight, the streets of New York became a ghost town, and professional assignments stopped. Again, I needed to channel my feelings and what I saw happening around me into the work somehow. I started to think about the idea of unseen pathogens, microscopic life forms that could make us sick or kill us, seemingly at random. With the advent of COVID and then the protests for racial justice, the lies and misinformation continued. I started to include landmarks and other structures, which were pretty much closed and mostly deserted. What would happen to them if nature took hold, if vegetation overgrew the familiar and transformed it into something altogether different and foreign looking, but also strange and beautiful?
Yeah, Robert, I don't know if this is a good time to ask you, but the composition of doing the flowers and the buildings, can you speak a little bit to that?
It's not planned. I mean, I look at images that I think will go together, but I don't always know how it'll come out. Sometimes I'm very surprised and it's really feels great to me. And other times I just, fail and I keep trying and I'll swap out images. So
Okay.
there is no formula, other than verticals with verticals and horizontals with horizontals.
That was a question from Catherine. Good,
Okay, thanks, Catherine.
good question.
I also went back in my files and pulled some older images of figures and bodies to incorporate with my current nature imagery. At this point, I am shooting images and elements specifically to play with and use later in pieces for this project. They tend to be more abstract, more graphic, maybe have more extremes and contrasts sometimes. Occasionally, I will go out to a specific location and create a library of images that I can work with down the road, or combine them with other future images in a way that I was not anticipating when I shot them. I also do many more variations now, using different combinations of images, color palettes, or techniques. You can see some of the same basic elements repeated in some of the images, but with greatly different outcomes and often very different feelings to the final images. Although I am really making images for myself, I am happy when other people enjoy them as well, are moved by them, and occasionally actually want to buy a print to hang on their wall. I do get tired of doing the same kinds of images over and over, and occasionally continually try to push myself in new directions, both aesthetically, but also by trying new techniques to travel on new paths with the work. Hopefully, these images may cause people to look at and question what they are told, what is happening in the world around them, about what is real and what is unreal. Think about how they may control or be controlled by what they see and hear and read. But I'm using some of the very technology that can be the most harmful to the environment to create these images is not lost on me. Electricity generated by fossil fuels, heavy metals, and non-recyclable materials used in computers, plus the aluminum and dyes used to fix the images in a more permanent and easily viewable form. And then there is the whole idea of NFTs and their ecological footprint. But life goes on. The pandemic endures. The war continues in Ukraine, and America seems to become even more divided. Nowadays, I often think about my own mortality, my legacy, if you will, and how my footprint and lifestyle choices affect the planet and what the country and world will be like going forward.
It's really going to be an interesting journey to see where you go from here.
Exactly. I mean, I never know. I think I've gotten to the end and then something happens, or I just figure out a new technique that lets me create images in a different way. Or I just, I don't know, kind of go in a different way, a different path.
Speak a little bit, Robert, because it's so intense. Some of the systems that you work with, with all the other photographers here, just to, what are you using? What programs? All of that.
Okay, let me just wrap up what I had written and then
Yeah.
I'll go into that.
Okay.
As I have no idea where this project is going next, I thought I would close by looking back, way back, at a few pre-digital SX70 images I did over 40 years ago that are the antithesis of digital. They are analog, one of a kind, physical prints showing that even back then, I was thinking about manipulating images, moving or blurring elements, doing multiple exposures, dealing with flowers and nature images in a way not all that different from today.
Did you just come upon those older images, Robert, or you?
I thought of them and thought maybe it would be a way to wrap up, kind of look back and
Yeah.
see how much has changed or hasn't. Anyway, thank you for coming on this journey with me. Please feel free to follow me on Instagram. Going back to your question about technique, as I said, originally the images were just straight images I'd shot of urban tree things that I just started inverting and messing with. And then I started consciously being more specific about elements that I wanted, instead of broader scenes, going in with a macro lens and getting some of the close-ups of flowers or leaves to create more of a graphic kind of elements to work with, which is kind of where I am now. And then in Photoshop, I take several images, anywhere from 2 to 4, generally not more than that, and do them as layers and do things with adjustment layers and blending them and just try different variations to create different versions of the image.
Right. So, and how long does it take to create some of these images, Robert?
It really depends. Sometimes it's really easy, and the first one you get, you go, that's pretty good. But I always, kind of keep going with it. Other times I just try and can't get anywhere, and I'll try swapping out images, or sometimes I'll purposely take images that I don't really like and try to combine them and see what happens. Because some of the best ones actually are ones that would be images that I wouldn't think I would want to use. I'll take even some out of focus images to throw them in there too, because that creates some interesting effects.
So you said up to 4 or 5 images?
I would say generally 4, but some of the ones you saw, like the one of the Flatiron building with the flowers, just 2 images.
Right.
It just really depends. It's an exploration, it's experiment. Some of I'd say most of it is luck. I wish I had a great formula for success. You just try it until you get something you like, and then you keep going, and maybe you get something a little better, and maybe you get to a point where you just can't go any further and have to stop or give up with it at that moment.
Is it hard to stop?
Sometimes it is, yeah, especially when the computer, starts acting up and you have to shut down when you're in the middle of where you have to stop and do something else. But also, like anything, sometimes it's hard to start because you kind of just do 1 or 2 and then you just feel like you've got nothing, and you have to kind of force yourself to keep trying until you hopefully get something you like. But when I get one that feels right, it's just, I wouldn't say it's instantaneous, but generally I know which are the stronger ones, or pretty quickly I can say that's just, it's almost like that I think it was Michelangelo that said, the statue is in the marble waiting to be freed, kind of a thing. Not to put myself on that level.
You just put your name and Michelangelo in the same sentence. Very good, Robert.
He's not going to complain at this point.
That's very good.
So
yeah, you have to see in the chat room there's so many wonderful comments. If anyone has any questions, Jay, you can unmute folks and raise your hand, and we'll get to you. The one thing that's nice is that Nancy and Robert both reference their moms as inspiration. That's very, very nice.
I have a question, Robert.
There you go.
sure.
Because of the process that you talked about, and I don't know your other work, but I think somebody commented you are a commercial photographer, or is that what you did?
Yeah, mostly people, portrait, things
Real.
like that, events.
Okay, so my question is, in your description of how you started and moved through the process, personally, did you find it healing by the time you were really deep into it? Because watching it, even if you hadn't described it, and we saw the nature and the desolate part of nature, and then moving through, if I were to look at it even as a book of a story of just visual without hearing your comments, I would know that I would assume that the artist had some kind of transformation. So based upon that, did you have a transformation?
I think I did in a couple of ways. One, obviously, was working through my feelings of grief and sadness at the losses, and then, the frustration at things going on in the country that allowed me to kind of channel into something creative instead of just yelling at the TV screen or something. And also what I was getting, I felt really strongly it was very personal. I mean, I do portraits and people photographs, and obviously I have my own slant on them. But, it's very different. There's, portrait photographers, there's a lot of people that can do what I do, and a lot of them are a lot better. Whereas it comes to this, I feel like this is a lot, it's more unique, and it's more unique to me and where I've come in my life as a photographer and as a person to get to this point. But by the same token, when things happen in the country that are horrific and scary, I do start to go back into that darker place and need to keep trying to think positive and use the work to kind of get me out of that and into a better place, I would say.
Yeah. Beautiful.
But thank you.
Yeah. We have a question from Juliet.
Which one?
I know, it's very competitive here. I wanted to know when you're printing out the images, now that the images themselves are so textural, are you going glossy? Are you going matte? Are you going with the metal? Like, what process do you find works to capture the next level, which is the printed version?
At the suggestion of a friend of mine many years ago, before I was even doing these, he was talking about printing on aluminum. So I tried that and I really liked it. So it's a dye sublimation process with image. What they do is they print it in reverse on a backing paper, put it in a press with the aluminum. This is for those of you not familiar with how this works. They heat it to several hundred degrees. The ink vaporizes and goes into the pores of the aluminum so that the image is kind of infused in the metal. I don't like the finishes where you can see the aluminum, because to me that just, it breaks up the image. So I go with ones, I think it has a white coating. So you don't see the metal, but it's in the metal in a way. So it gives it a dimension. I did one as a test glossy, but I didn't like it because it just seems too plasticky. So when you see the prints, you do get, the colors definitely jump out at you. I do them borderless. I mean, you can just go up to it as an object and just get as close as you want and see the detail, because a lot of them do have amazing details and little color things happening in there.
So they're on the aluminum, and then you don't need to put them in a frame. You can just hang them.
No, you don't need glass. You don't need a frame. They're pretty rugged. I'm told you can even put them outside to a point. I mean, obviously anything in the sunlight will fade over time, but these are pretty durable. So,
And do you use Dugal? I mean, who do you use for,
when I did my show last summer, I used a place called Blazing Editions in, I guess it's Providence, Rhode Island. And they did an amazing job with them. I printed some up to 40 by 60 inches.
Wow.
They don't weigh as much as you would think. I mean, the corners are a bit delicate and you don't want to scratch them, but you can lift them and carry them.
Yeah, that's light.
So, I rented a van and drove up there to get them.
The size must be spectacular that day, huh?
Yeah. When I did the show and you walked in and there was, 2 40 by 60s by the door, it just,
wow.
The one that was used in the Eventbrite invite, that was one of them. And then the one at the Flatiron building that actually sold.
Wow.
So,
beautiful.
Yeah. Anyone's got big walls, reach out.
Yeah. Also, I mean, any questions for William and Nancy, now's the time as well. So, it's open to everybody. But
I just wanted to thank everybody because their presentations were wonderful and so different. Everyone was unique, beautiful.
Yeah, you're speaking for all of us, Sandy.
Always do.
Very good. Well, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our presenters. Questions, the great comments in the chat room. Everyone really, you have to go through that. And you can find Nancy's book, at her website. William, Robert, everything is on their sites. Any kind of information. And again, I thank everyone for coming in. like I mentioned earlier before, we want to do a series on mental health issues, for a week, maybe in the next coming week. So if you have any contacts that you think would, have bodies of work that would want to show, just send that on to me. I would love to try to put that together. Well, we will put it together, but any help from anyone would be very welcome. Also, we're in the dreaded days of summer, so it's everyone be careful. Don't make sure you put suntan lotion on, and make sure you have an extra cocktail because it is summertime on the weekends. And and just thanks to everyone for always coming in. I can't tell you how much we appreciate that, and a thanks to Jay for shepherding us through another night. And if there are any questions, now would be the time. If not, then we'll see you next time. I think our next show is scheduled for, I think it's the 3rd of August. Yes, and that's the night where we celebrate the winners from the American Photography competition with Jeff Roberts and the folks over at Pro Photo Daily. So that'll be fun. And we'll see you down the road.